G'day, I'm Ryuki-san Dev, and in part 10 of this series, Unity for the Absolute Beginner, we will be making our first simple game. Alright, so as I mentioned in the last video, I think it's better now to dive in and start creating practical stuff and learn along the way. I will still be making supplemental videos throughout the series on certain subjects as well though. So in this video we will make a start on our first simple game. This is going to be part 1. It will be a little different from the previous videos because I will spend less time explaining everything if I don't get carried away. But it's okay because in future games the same things will come up again. So the game will be a player at the bottom of the screen and some stuff is going to fall from the sky and the player has to avoid touching it or they will lose the game. We will be covering lots of new stuff, so switch your brain on and let's get into it. Alrighty, so first we need to create a brand new 3D project. I am going to name mine Game 1. It's not very original, I know, but it helps me keep track when I make more of them. But you can name yours whatever you like. And I'll be back when this thing finishes loading. Now, just double check that your game screen is set to Full HD 1920 by 1080 down here. Alright, so let's start by renaming the default scene to something a little better. So click on your sample scene in the project window and rename it to Gameplay. And then say yes to reload. Okay, now let's change our view to 2D. So click the 2D button. Going to do most of our editing in 2D mode. So click on your main camera and double check that its position Y is 1 and its position Z is -10. It should be that by default, but you never know. Okay, so firstly, images for the textures and any other files used are in my GitHub. If you do intend to follow along with this, then pause the video and go and get them. The link is in the description. So first we're going to create a backdrop for the game. So right click your hierarchy and create plane. And let's name it background. And reset its transform. Alright, now you won't see it in the scene too well because it's laying flat and we are in 2D mode, so we need to flip it up. So in the transform properties of the background, set rotation X to 90. And Z to -180. Let's also change the position for Z to 1. Because our player and enemies will be on 0, we don't want them to collide with the background. And at any stage during this game series, you can always toggle 2D off whenever you get curious. So we need to fill the game screen with our plane. So just drag each edge until it's filled up. My transform looks like this, and yours should be something close to it. Cool. Now let's add a picture to the back. I'm going to use this one here. And create an images folder. And drag the image in. Cool. Backdrop is set. Okay, now I was just going to use primitive shapes again for this game, but stuff it. Let's use some pre-made models from the Unity store. The free ones, of course. So we're going to click Window and then Asset Store. This should open the Unity store in your default web browser. Right, now, so you could get pretty loose in here and end up downloading a lot of stuff, but just be careful because it all adds up. And depending on the models you use, they might even slow your game down. I remember when I first started, I just wanted to download every single asset that I could find that was free because they all looked cool. So just take it easy. Anyway, for the enemy, I'm going to use the 3D props Adorable Foods. If you search for it on the asset store, it should be there and it should be free. I will leave a link in the description for it in the Unity store as well. And just in case you do have problems finding it, it is also available in my GitHub link. If you do get it from my GitHub link, then after you download it, double click it and select Open with Unity to import it. But do try to get it from the Unity Asset Store first. Now, if you are in the store on the web page, then as long as you're logged in, you should be able to add it to My Assets and then select Open in Unity and select Download. Then select Import. And the second import screen is just for you to select only certain items from the package to import, but we are going to import everything, so just click Import again and close the package manager. So now that you've added and downloaded the package, you can use it anytime in a new or existing project by clicking Window and selecting Package Manager. It shows you everything that you currently have available for you to use, and you just import it into your project. Now you should see a folder called Icons in your project. Just drop that folder down and you should see a list of prefabs. Click on any of those prefabs, and in the inspector you should be able to see what they look like. Sometimes you might have to drag the preview window up in the inspector to see them. So select one that you want to use for our falling object and drag it into the hierarchy. I'm going to go with the cake. And let's reset its transform. And I'm going to move mine up to the top edge. And let's also name it Enemy. Alright, so now let's configure our enemy a little bit. So first of all, we need to give it a rigid body. So let's click Add Component and Rigid Body. Now as it is with gravity, the enemy will already drop. If we push play real quick, it drops. Okay, and stop the game. So that's great, but we have no control over its speed. So let's turn off gravity and control that ourselves with add force later. So gravity off, and let's change drag to 8 and angular drag to 0. We're basically changing angular drag to 0 because we're going to spin this enemy as it falls, and we don't want it to stop spinning, so we're basically giving it no friction at all. Now, one thing our enemy doesn't have is a collider, so it can't collide with anything, which later in the game isn't going to be much good. So we need to click Add Component again, search for Collider. So you'll need to select the closest collider to the shape of the food that you've chosen. In my case, I'm going with a box collider. Also, don't use any of the 2D ones. So select your collider, and now click the Edit button here, and make sure your collider is surrounding your object properly. You will probably need to jump out of 2D mode to do it properly, and you can double click on the enemy in your hierarchy to zoom in on it. And then just drag these little squares here to increase and decrease the size, and make sure that the object is surrounded by the green box. Alright, well mine looks about right straight off the bat, so I'm good to go. And so I'm going to double click my camera to zoom back out again and back into 2D mode. So just remembering that it's the collider that does the colliding, not the model, not the mesh. Now we're going to need a scripts folder, so let's create that in our project window. And right click it and create a new C# script and name it enemy. Drag the enemy script onto the enemy object in the hierarchy. And double check that it's attached. Alright, our enemy is pretty much good to go, so let's create a prefabs folder in our project window. And drag the enemy into it to create a prefab. And you want to select original prefab. Alright, we'll leave the enemy in the scene for a bit because we need to check on some things later. So let's double click our enemy script to open it. So we want the enemy to spin and travel down the screen towards the player. So first let's set some variables. Let's go public float force equals 1 and public float torque equals 1. And private rigid body enemy RB. And now in our start method, let's type enemy RB equals get component rigid body and enemy RB dot add torque talk, talk, talk. Then in our update method, let's type in enemy RB dot add force vector3 dot down times force. Alright, so this should all be familiar from part 9 of the series, but just quickly, we have variables for force and torque. Then we created a rigid body variable to store our enemy's rigid body. Then in the start method, we retrieved the actual enemy rigid body and stored it in enemy RB. Then we used add torque to spin the enemy with the force of torque. Then in update, we are pushing the enemy downward with a force of the force variable. And that's it. So let's save our script and back into the editor. And run. Cool. Down she goes. Now, of course, you can click on the enemy properties in the inspector and change the variables for force and torque to your liking. I'm actually going to change my enemy force to 2 because it's a little bit slow. Alrighty, now for a bunch of new stuff. So get your thinking caps on. Now, we just have one enemy falling, and after it has left the screen, nothing else happens. So we're going to need some more. We need to start spawning stuff in automatically. So firstly, we need to know how high to spawn from. Probably above the camera's view, obviously, is the best. So let me drag up my enemy here and see what Y position should be. Well, it looks like about 7 for the Y position. So let's delete the enemy from the scene. Now, right-click in your hierarchy and create empty and name it Game Manager. Now, right-click in your scripts folder and create a script and name it Game Manager 2. And drag the Game Manager script onto the Game Manager object. So we just attached our script to an empty object in the scene so that our Game Manager script will run. So I'm calling it Game Manager because it's going to handle score and spawning and general stuff, and it's something in this game that won't get destroyed. Okay, let's double click the Game Manager script to open it. Right, so firstly let's make a variable to hold that Y position. Let's do private float enemy Y equals 7. So next, the Game Manager script is going to need to know what object to spawn in for us, so we have to create a reference to it. So type in public Gameobject enemy. Right, now save your script and head back into the editor. So if you click the Game Manager object in your hierarchy, you will see a new empty reference for us to fill. All we need to do is drag our enemy prefab from the project window into it, and boom. Now our script will know what we are referring to when we say enemy. Alright, back to the script. Now to spawn stuff from our project into the scene, we will use something new, which is the Instantiate statement. So in your start method, type in Instantiate enemy. So this will create a copy, or if you like an instance, of our prefab and place it in the scene. But it will place it at whatever position the prefab was when we created it. But we want it to spawn out of view and then drop. So in our code, we can also tell it to create the instance at a particular location. So let's do that. So after enemy, type comma, new vector3 enemy.transform dot position dot x comma enemy y bracket comma enemy dot transform dot rotation. So we've now specified where exactly to create this instance. Create at the x of the original prefab, the y of 7 as set in our enemy y variable. And notice also that I didn't specify the z position. Yep, it does allow you to do that, even though I specified vector 3. It's kind of a special case that I can use because my z position is 0. Let me put a bracket here so you can see what I mean. And there it is. Then we specified the rotation as it is in the original prefab. Not that it matters because the enemy script will spin it anyway. One more important thing to mention is that I said enemy.transform, not just transform. If I said just transform, then the script would take the position of the game manager object because that's what the script is attached to. But we want the position of the enemy object. Okay, so let's save it and run. Cool, that's spawned off screen. If you're playing it focused, you can see the new instance in the hierarchy called enemy clone. And when you stop the game, it disappears. Alright, so we're not done yet. Now we need to spawn more and at intervals. So let's get back in the script. So now we want the spawn action to repeat. But first we have to put this instantiate code in a new custom function so that we can call it. This is going to be the first one of the series. So just before the last curly bracket at the bottom of the script, type in private void spawn enemy and then 2 empty brackets. And if Visual Studio didn't automatically put in the curly brackets afterwards, then put them in too. Right, now select the code in our start method and drag it in between our new function curly brackets. There it is. We now have a custom function. The private just means that it's only accessible from within this script. The void means that the function returns no value. Later we will make a function that does return a value. And then spawn enemy is the name of the function. The 2 empty brackets are for any parameters. We will get into that at a later stage too. I was actually thinking just to make a video on functions, and I'm thinking now maybe I should. No. Anyway, back into it. So this function can be called anytime, anywhere in the script. We could just simply type in spawn enemy in the start method and it would run that function once. But we want it to run more than once. So in the start method, type in invoke repeating, spawn enemy in speech marks, and a comma and a 1, and a comma and a 2. So what we have just done is tell the script to run the function in speech marks. Start running it 1 second after the game starts and keep running it every 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds a new instance of enemy will be created. Let's save it and see. And run. Cool. There they go. Now, what's the next problem? Well, they're all spawning at the same X location, so we have to randomize it. Can't have them all coming down exactly in the same place. So first of all, we need to know what the boundary is going to be. So I'm going to temporarily drag my enemy prefab back into the scene and now drag it to the edge of the picture to see what X is. Well, it's about 9.6, I think should do it. And so on the other side will be minus 9.6. Yeah. Okay, so let's delete this enemy from our scene again and back into the script. Let's set a variable to hold the boundary number. So let's do private float x boundary equals 9.6f. While we're at it, let's create a variable for our repeat rate and make it public so we can change how fast these things spawn from the inspector as well. So public float spawn rate equals 2. And replace the 2 in our code to spawn rate. Alright, now let's get a random X location each time an instance is created. So above your instantiate code, type in float xpos equals random.range minus x boundary, comma x boundary. And then replace enemy.transform.position.x with xpos. Alright, so we've used random range, which will choose a number between the first and second parameters. So each time that function gets run, it chooses a number, then runs the next line using that number. So let's save our script and get back to the editor. Now I'm going to change my spawn rate to 1, make it a little quicker, and change my play mode to focused, and run. Okay. Spawning in random X locations. Cool. Alright, so there's one more thing to go. So if we look at the hierarchy while this thing's running, it's full of instances and more are being added every second. Now if I left this game running for long enough, the game would probably grind to a halt. So we need to destroy the ones that fall below the ground that we don't see anymore. So we need to see what position the bottom would be. So let's stop the game and drag our enemy prefab in again. And drag it down to the bottom until you can't see it. I think I'm going to go with minus 5.5 just to be safe. And delete the enemy from the scene again. Alright, so let's open our enemy script this time. Right, let's make a variable to hold our boundary info. So let's type in private float destroy boundary equals minus 5.5f. And now in our update method, we just do a simple if statement. So let's type in if transform dot position dot y is smaller than destroy boundary, and then in the curly brackets, destroy game object. So now if the enemy object's Y position falls below minus 5.5, it will destroy itself. Cool, let's save and run. And if you look up here, you can see the enemies disappearing when they reach the bottom. Cool. Okay, lastly I'm going to get into my enemy script and throw in some rem statements and change anything from public to private that I don't need public anymore to keep things in order. Okay, that should do it. And now the same with the game manager script. Cool bananas. Alright, well I think we have the enemies all sorted out for now, and we've covered a lot of new stuff along the way, so let's recap. So first of all, we had a brief look at the asset store and the package manager. In the next video, we'll be doing it again for the player. We've used Instantiate to create an instance of a prefab in our scene. We also used Invoke Repeating to get the code to repeat something at a set interval. We created our first custom private function that we can call from anywhere inside the script. And we got the script to choose a random number between two values. And we got an object to destroy itself when the condition is correct for it. Well, that's a step up from the previous videos. I hope it will all make sense to you. In this game and in further videos, there will be more exposure to all of these things, so you'll pick it up. Now, I was thinking that this was going to be one video, but with me wanting to explain everything, I realize now that it might be at least 2 videos. Just as a reminder also that some of you are going to think that this is a walk in the park, and others might think it just feels like rocket science. Either way, please don't hesitate to ask me anything. Some parts of this might have seemed too quick and not explained in depth, I'm not sure. So if it warrants a video, I will make one. Starting to think that functions might be a video that I might make. So in the next video, we will get a player in there. We'll make it move with controls and make the player lose if it gets hit by the enemy cake. Yeah, it doesn't sound right, does it? Anyway, we'll deal more with movement and we'll get into collisions for the first time as well. And I will also try to get the second part of this game series out way quicker. I mean, who wants to code half a game and then have to wait a week? Certainly not me. So I hope to see you on the next video very soon.